You raise your right hand, sir. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So again?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Guard, good morning again. You have been designated as a corporate representative of Monsanto on a number of different topics involving sales, marketing, advertising, and labeling. Do you understand that?
I do.
Did you have any information or training as to the chronic toxicity testing of glyphosate?
What do you mean when you say chronic?
I don't know. You're the global lawn and garden lead. Have you ever heard of the term chronic toxicity?
No.
Never heard of that?
No.
As the global lawn and garden lead, your job duties included United States media and advertising, correct?
That's correct.
It included long-range planning and budgeting, correct?
Correct.
It included development of the annual business plan and strategy.
Yes.
It involved, at times, conflict resolution.
Yes.
It involved project management and product development, correct?
Correct.
It included managing the advertising, media, and product development for Canada.
Yes.
It involved managing the expansion of Monsanto lawn and garden products into Mexico.
Correct.
It involved oversight of the international and United States business, correct?
Correct.
It involved what are called brand extension projects, correct?
Correct.
It involved managing various licensing agreements to different entities.
Yes.
And it also involved what was called obsolete inventory management, correct?
Correct. All within the scope of the lawn and garden space. That's right.
That's right. You certainly agree as Monsanto's representative that consumers have a freedom of choice, correct?
I believe in the free market, and consumers can go to the shelf and buy what products they'd like.
Okay. And part of making an informed decision is having knowledge about the hazards of the product, correct?
That is a consideration that consumers likely would factor in.
Let's mark as Exhibit 2 the safety data sheet that you brought in this morning that you reviewed for Roundup Ready to Use Weed and Grass Killer 3, dated October 15, 2015. Now let's start very generally. Safety data sheets get updated periodically. You're aware of that, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And this particular safety data sheet is after the International Agency for Research on Cancer determined that glyphosate was a probable carcinogen, correct?
Correct.
And you know that a company is required to put an IARC finding of probable carcinogenicity on their safety data sheets for a product, correct?
That's right. OSHA requires that administratively.
Okay. Do you know why OSHA requires companies to list a finding by the International Agency for Research on Cancer?
I don't know why.
As Monsanto's representative, is it your understanding that OSHA must at least give credence to the findings of the International Agency for Research on Cancer if they require companies to put their findings in safety data sheets?
I don't know. I don't know what, there's others within the company that would have a deeper understanding of that.
Okay, and OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, correct?
Yes.
And OSHA was established in the early 1970s for worker protection, correct?
I don't know.
What's your understanding of what OSHA is?
Very high level. I know what it stands for. I know their job is to ensure the safety of workers in the United States.
Okay, and in following their responsibilities to ensure the safety of workers in the United States, you know that they require a company to put a statement about IARC's finding if IARC finds a substance to be a probable carcinogen, correct?
Right. If my understanding is OSHA has regulations that require if IARC finds that. I don't believe OSHA does any kind of evaluation of that data themselves.
So if OSHA is requiring something, Monsanto wouldn't not provide that information, correct?
Monsanto will follow the requirements of OSHA.
So you put what was required by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and then you basically said, we disagree with that, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
There are various precautionary measures that are listed in a safety data sheet, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So there's lots of precautionary information in the safety data sheet for the exact same product, which is not on the label that the consumer would be reading, correct?
There's different text describing the warnings,
Okay.
precautions.
Is there anything in the label that says avoid, strike that. I'm going to read from the safety data sheet, Exhibit 2, and then I'm going to ask you if that statement is in the label that the consumer would see, okay?
Okay.
All right. Is there anything in the label that says, quote, avoid breathing vapor or mist, end quote?
No, there isn't.
Okay. Quote, wash hands, strike that. Quote, when using, do not eat, drink, or smoke, end quote. That's on the safety data sheet, Exhibit 2. Is that in the label?
No.
Quote, wash hands thoroughly after handling or contact, end quote. That's in the safety data sheet. Is that in the label?
No.
From the safety data sheet. Quote, wash contaminated clothing before reuse, end quote. That statement's not in the label, correct?
There's a statement that says wash thoroughly with soap and water after handling. That's referring to your hands, but not the clothing. Well, no, that is referring to both eyes and clothing.
Where's that statement? It
It
says avoid contact with eyes or clothing. The label, wash thoroughly with soap and water after handling.
right. That's a required statement by the EPA. That's on there, yes.
Okay. But the wash contaminated clothing before reuse is not on the label, correct?
Correct.
There's no statement about thoroughly cleaning equipment after use, correct? Which is in the safety data sheet? No such statement on the label?
No.
Okay. Nothing about not the SDS, the safety data sheet says do not contaminate drains, sewers, and waterways when disposing of equipment, rinse water, end quote. That's not on the label, correct?
No.
Okay. On the safety data sheet, Section 8 references exposure controls and personal protection. Do you see that?
Section 8?
Yes, on the safety data sheet.
Okay. What about Section 8?
It's entitled Exposure Controls / Personal Protection, correct?
Correct.
All right. And then there's a section 8.3 that says, quote, recommendations for personal protective equipment, end quote. Do you see that?
Yes.
Section 8.3.1 is entitled Eye Protection, correct?
Yes.
Quote, if there is significant potential for contact, wear chemical goggles, end quote. You see that?
Yes.
No such statement on the label, right?
Correct. No statement to wear goggles.
Section 8.3.2 is entitled Skin Protection, correct?
Yes.
And it reads, quote, the safety data sheet reads, quote, no special requirement when used as recommended. If repeated or prolonged contact, wear chemical-resistant gloves, end quote. That's not on the label, correct?
Correct.
Would you want to know if an herbicide that you go into a Home Depot, for example, to purchase could get into your bloodstream? Would you want to know that fact before making a purchasing decision?
Yeah, I mean, you're asking me to speculate.
But the safety data sheets are not provided with the Roundup Lawn and Garden products to the consumer purchasing them, correct?
Correct.
I want to mark as Exhibit 4 a safety data sheet dated December 15th, 2010 for the Monsanto Company Lawn and Garden product Roundup Weed and Grass Killer Super Concentrate. Have you ever seen this before?
I don't recall.
Roundup Weed and Grass Killer Super Concentrate was one of the Roundup glyphosate containing products that you were responsible for, correct?
Yes.
And when a product is designated as a concentrate or a super concentrate. That means that it comes in a concentrated form in a container that the consumer has to take a portion of and then mix with water, correct?
Correct.
And there have been marketing studies we'll take a look at in terms of who the super concentrate, sort of the demographics of those consumers, correct?
Correct.
And those are generally, in terms of who purchases super concentrate, individuals who are heavy users of Roundup, correct?
Generally speaking, correct.
Okay. And on the safety data sheet, on the first page, section 2 is entitled Hazards Identification, correct?
Yes.
And it reads, quote, caution, exclamation point. Causes moderate but temporary eye irritation, causes skin irritation, harmful if inhaled, end quote. Do you see that?
I do.
And that's all in capital letters, correct?
Correct.
And your understanding of that is that that is done to draw somebody's attention to it, correct?
I don't know why it's capitalized.
As Monsanto's representative on safety data sheet process and labeling, you have no idea why Monsanto was capitalizing certain information in a safety data sheet?
What I know is we have experts who follow the guidelines as required by OSHA in preparing these, and I rely on those experts to prepare these according to that requirement.
I'm not asking you about that. I'm asking you whether it's your sworn testimony that you have no understanding as to why that section is capitalized as Monsanto's representative.
I know we have people that have the detailed knowledge. I personally don't have the knowledge of why that's capitalized.
Do you have a general understanding as to why somebody would capitalize something in a safety data sheet as opposed to not capitalizing the words?
Yeah, I don't know why.
Okay. The Exhibit 4, the super concentrate Roundup safety data sheet, in that same section then has a section entitled, quote, potential health effects, end quote. Do you see that?
Yes.
And under that it says likely routes of exposure, eye contact, skin contact, inhalation, end quote. You see that?
Yes.
And that's your understanding of 3 different ways that an individual handling Roundup super concentrate could be exposed to it, correct?
Correct.
Do you have an understanding that all 3 of those could lead to absorption and then into the bloodstream of a person? Or as Monsanto's representative, you have no idea?
Yeah, I can't speak for Monsanto, and I don't know personally.
Under that, it says, quote, eye contact short term causes moderate but temporary eye irritation, end quote. Do you know whether they're talking about glyphosate or Roundup?
Again, I don't have the detailed knowledge of what they're referring to on this. I know we have experts that do have that detailed knowledge.
Okay, so as Monsanto's designated expert on the subject of safety data sheets, you don't have that knowledge?
I know the process that we follow.
Okay, well, I thought you just told me you didn't know the process other than you believed it was rigorous. Do you know the process?
I know at a high level the process.
Okay, and at the high level, other than your belief that the process is rigorous, do you have any other knowledge of the process?
That we collect information from various groups within Monsanto to prepare this in accordance with OSHA.
You certainly know that companies can add information, particularly safety information, into a safety data sheet, correct? It may not be required by OSHA, right?
I don't know the rules of OSHA's requirements on an SDS.
Okay. So that as Monsanto's representative on the process in developing safety data sheets, you don't know what the requirements are or are not.
I know the process of us collecting the data, the information that we want to appear on there. Whether it's elective data or not, I don't know what the exact requirements are of OSHA on placement of additional data.
What, do you know enough as Monsanto's representative designated to talk about the process of safety data sheets that there is elective, as you use the term, information that can be put into a safety data sheet by a company?
Yeah, I don't know.
Can you think of any reason that OSHA would not allow a manufacturer to put additional safety information that the manufacturer is aware of that's not required by OSHA? Is there any reason why they wouldn't allow that?
I don't know.
You certainly know that on the label that goes on the bottle to the consumer, Monsanto can put lots of information that's not required, correct?
They can, but it is reviewed by the EPA.
And you would agree that Monsanto uses its labels on the consumer products of Roundup to actually market the product, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that information is certainly not required, the marketing information in a label, right?
That's correct.
On the Exhibit 4, the 2010 Super Concentrate Safety Data Sheet, it continues under potential health effects. Quote, skin contact short term may cause skin irritation. Inhalation short term, harmful by inhalation, end quote. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. You know, there are Roundup lawn and garden ads that depict the user wearing short sleeves and shorts applying Roundup, correct?
Yes.
Not wearing any sort of goggles or face protection, correct?
Correct.
When did you first find out that the label for Super Concentrate and the label for Weed and Grass Killer number 3 had less safety information for the consumer than the safety data sheets for those products had for the employees of Monsanto and Scotts? When did you first find that out?
I've known that since prior to joining Monsanto, that there's different information on the two documents.
I'm not asking you generically. I'm asking you specifically to these two products. Did you know before today that there was in fact a difference about the safety information Monsanto was providing?
Yeah, I have known that for a long time.
Okay. Did you ever speak to anybody about, hey, why are we not telling consumers buying Super Concentrate or Roundup Weed and Grass Killer number 3 that they should follow what's on the SDS sheet? Did you ever ask anybody?
I don't recall.
In any means of communication that you can think of, did you ever ask anyone at Monsanto, as the Monsanto lawn and garden lead for the entire earth, why don't we provide the safety information to a consumer purchasing our Roundup product that we're providing to our employees?
Yeah, I don't recall.
Okay, and what are the procedures on the label with respect to whether a consumer who has saturated their clothing should take off the contaminated clothing? Where does it say that on the label?
It doesn't say that on the label.
Okay. Has any ad for Roundup lawn and garden products, a television ad, a radio ad, a print ad, a brochure, any kind of communication to the consumer designed for marketing purposes by Monsanto ever told lawn and garden Roundup users to wear chemical goggles if there's a potential for contact with their eyes?
Not that I'm aware of. The personal protection gloves in this case is we follow what is on the EPA label.
It's not the EPA label. Monsanto proposes a label. Do you know that much? As Monsanto's representative about the process involved in labeling Roundup lawn and garden products, you certainly know that the proposed label comes from Monsanto to the EPA, correct?
Part of it does, that's correct.
Well, when you say part of it is, there are certain things that have to be on there, correct?
Correct.
And that is usually less than 5% of what's on the label, correct? The required information.
I don't know the percentage.
I'm going to mark as Exhibit 8. This is an email with an attachment. The email is from Martin Voss, V-O-S-S, to a number of different people. It's dated February 12, 2009. This was produced by Monsanto. The Bates number is 034000272, and the attachment is a February 12, 2009 Roundup FTO Growth Initiative, and that's a PowerPoint. You see that? And this is The email says from Mr. Voss, "Dear all, attached for your reference is the Roundup FTO deck we didn't get to go through today. Looking forward to presenting this to you during a telco soon." So let's untangle that a little bit. FTO means freedom to operate, correct?
Yes.
Would you agree that any alleged hazard could affect Monsanto's freedom to operate with respect to Roundup if it was an alleged hazard of Roundup?
Yes.
If you turn to Roundup on the media screen / consequences page, on that PowerPoint it says, quote, "For Roundup, restrictions could directly impact our business. Uses the more at risk, vineyard / around the farm / amenity / LNG," end quote. You see that?
Yes.
So before you got there was concern at Monsanto that restrictions on Roundup could impact the lawn and garden business, among other things, correct?
Yeah, I would assume so based on that sentence.
If you turn to the page, "What do we do?" Stewardship technical teams. See that page? In the middle, the bullet point says, quote, "Glyphosate and Roundup tox allegation. Defend glyphosate and Roundup against all toxicological allegations, parenthesis, belly ... studies, close parenthesis, by asking to the officials or independent experts to write reports, publications refuting their conclusions," end quote. You see that?
Yes.
Monsanto is going to defend Roundup and glyphosate against all toxicological allegations without even knowing what they are, right?
I don't know.
Well, that's what it says, right? Defend glyphosate and Roundup against all toxicological allegations, right?
Yes, those are the words on this page.
And in fact, that's what Monsanto did for years and years. If something negative came up about Roundup regarding toxicology, it would push back against it, correct?
If there was an allegation against the tox profile of glyphosate and Roundup, we would investigate it.
It doesn't say investigate toxicological allegations here, does it?
That word isn't on the page.
Monsanto was spending for many years, on average, about $10 million a year advertising Roundup.
For Roundup Lawn and Garden in the United States, yes, that's right.
Okay, and you were responsible for the budget and the long-range planning, so you would know that, right?
That's correct.
Do you have an understanding that a single year's lawn and garden Roundup advertising expenditure was greater than all of the toxicity testing spending for Roundup?
I don't know the money how much was spent on tox studies.
If you turn to page 4 of Exhibit 11, the top says, quote, "Roundup dollar sales have increased at a CAGR of 12.6% from 1996 to 1999 and are projected to increase another 12.5% in the year 2000, end quote." Do you see that?
Yes.
Reading this graph correctly, the dollar sales of Roundup in 1996 were about 130 million. 1997 sales of Roundup for lawn and garden was just shy of 160 million.
That's what's written on this slide.
Okay, do you have any reason to think this is not accurate?
I don't have any reason to believe it's accurate or inaccurate.
And this was early in the year 2000, but the projection was the Monsanto Roundup lawn and garden dollar sales would be maybe $215 million approximately.
That's a reasonable assumption on what's being depicted on this chart.
In the process of Monsanto deciding what to put on a label of Roundup, has there ever been consideration of telling the consumers why certain precautions are being recommended?
I don't know.
And let me give you a specific. If there's a recommendation to wash hands, has there ever been a discussion as to telling people why they should wash their hands would increase the likelihood that they would wash their hands? Anything like that that you're aware of?
I'm not aware of any.
Did anybody ever ask why the formulations have not been tested for cancer in order for us to determine what health and safety information to put on the label?
I think our scientists have determined, and the EPA has determined the testing that's necessary to determine the safety of a product.
Well, you're not saying that a company is limited to only doing the required testing, are you?
I don't know what a company could. I suppose they could do additional testing if they wanted to.
Have there been discussions as to what the person in the commercial is wearing in terms of a message it might be sending to the consumers who are seeing the ad about the safety of the product?
Yes.
So somebody at Monsanto, for the ads that show for the lawn and garden Roundup, people wearing shorts and shirt sleeves, somebody made an intentional decision that that was okay to show?
That was reviewed and approved by Monsanto.
I'm going to mark as Exhibit 18 a PowerPoint titled Crop Protection Messaging Research, Presentation of Final Results, March 23rd, 2015. Now, obviously you should flip through this, but while you're doing so, it appears to me that you were present during this presentation.
I don't recall.
Well, you skipped over the page when I was asking that question. It says agenda, meeting objectives, and March 31st agenda, and then it has March 31st meeting agenda, and it has an agenda there, and under lawn and garden it says dash Jim, comma, Kim. Is there a Kim in lawn and garden that you're aware of in 2015?
No.
And Jim, is there any other Jim but you?
I don't recall any other gender.
Next page, page 12, is entitled Residential Overview. You see that?
I do.
Okay, and then on the next page, the results of this messaging research reads, quote, "The news is good. The safety of residential Roundup is not a top-of-mind concern for today's consumers," end quote. You see that?
Yes.
So this certainly involves your segment, right? Residential Roundup is your segment, right?
Yes.
Okay. And this messaging is telling the folks at Monsanto that for the residential use, safety is not a top-of-the-mind concern.
That the words on this page, yes.
Other than putting whatever information may or may not have made its way onto the web about the International Agency for Research on Cancer determination that glyphosate was a probable carcinogen, no one discussed actually giving that information to a consumer when they purchased the product, like on the label, in a brochure, at a point of purchase sign, in a TV ad, in a print ad, in any other means of communication?
I don't believe there was any conversations of adding the IARC statement on the packaging.
Did you ever think of that? Maybe we should tell people who are buying this product what this agency found?
I don't recall.
You don't recall ever thinking about that?
That's correct.
Mr. Gard, first, thank you very much for all the time you've taken over the past 2 days. This is Greg Chernak asking questions on behalf of Monsanto. I just have a small number of questions for you. You had been asked some questions about the safety data sheet and material safety data sheet. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Could you look at what's been marked as exhibit number 4? Have that in front of you?
Yes.
If you could just turn to the last page of that exhibit, which is a Bates number ending in 29021.
Could you kindly just identify for which product this is the SDS sheet for?
Certainly. This is the Roundup Weed and Grass Killer Super Concentrate with an effective date of December 15, 2010.
Thank you.
And you see there are two large boxes at the end of this document.
Yes.
If you could just read the first 5.5 lines of the first of those two boxes.
This material safety data sheet, parentheses MSDS, serves different purposes than and does not replace or modify the EPA-approved product labeling attached to and accompanying the product container. This MSDS provides important health, safety, and environmental information for employers, employees, emergency responders, and others handling large quantities of the product in the activities generally other than product use, while the labeling provides that information specifically for product use in the ordinary course.
Could you explain what lawn and garden products are?
Those are the products that are marketed and labeled for use by homeowners to use around their home.
And is there a separate division or group within Monsanto that is responsible just for lawn and garden products?
Yes,
And you're part of that group, is that right?
that's correct.
Are there other groups in Monsanto responsible for other types of Roundup products?
Yes.
And what groups are those?
We have a ag group, agriculture, and we have a group that handled ITNO products.
And starting with the ag or agriculture group, can you just describe generally the uses of Roundup products for the agricultural group?
Sure. Generally, that's a product that's used by a farmer or farmer's employees, typically spread in large quantities because they have large number of acres over the top or around and on crops to either produce food or clothing.
And you mentioned ITNO. What does ITNO stand for?
That stands for Industrial Turf and Ornamental.
And could you explain a little about what industrial turf and ornamental uses of Roundup are?
That would be the groups of products that are labeled and designed for people who are using it in golf courses, roadways, people that apply pesticides for a profession, either the guy that comes to your home and takes care of your weeds at your yard and is paid for that.
So a landscaper.
A landscaper, a professional landscaper, things like that. It would be professional applicators that are not agriculture and not do-it-yourself homeowners.
Now, would your group, the lawn and garden group, would you also work in the agriculture or the ITNO spaces?
No.
And how are the agriculture and the ITNO products different from the lawn and garden Roundup products? They're all Roundup branded glyphosate herbicides, though, correct?
That's correct.
But how are they different?
They have different formulas, different packaging systems, different labels, use instructions. Example might be a farmer could receive a tanker truck at their farm full of some kind of Roundup product, or a consumer would go to Home Depot or Lowe's and buy, a 1-gallon container.
Now, you've talked a lot about advertising, or a little bit about advertising over the past 2 days. The advertising you work on, is that limited to the lawn and garden space?
Yes.
Is there separate advertising in the agricultural space?
I suspect there is. I'm not really involved in that area.
And do you know if there's separate advertising in the ITNO space?
Same answer. I suspect there is, but I don't know.
How about marketing? Is the marketing you work on limited to the lawn and garden space?
Yes.
Do you know if there's separate marketing efforts in the agricultural space?
I suspect there is. Yes, there is.
And how about in the ITNO space? And is there separate marketing in the ITNO space?
Yes.
Now, turning back to lawn and garden specifically, how can users of the Roundup branded lawn and garden products obtain information about those products?
They can look at the product label. They can go to our Roundup.com website. They can do Google searches, and there's other information out on the internet. They can read the signs and brochures that we may put out there. They can ask store associates, their neighbors. There's a whole host of ways they can get information.
Okay, can we take a few minutes if you could look at what's been marked at Exhibit 5. It's a copy of the Roundup Super Concentrate label. And I believe Exhibit 6, if you want, is a blown-up version of the same.
Okay.
You have that in front of you, Mr. Guard?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if you look through the label, it contains several parts. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you know why?
It's required by the EPA.
Now, there's also a precautionary statement. I believe you and Mr. Crystal discussed it earlier.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Is it required to have a precautionary statement in a herbicide label?
Yes, it is.
And if you look at the front of the label, the first page, there's a caution statement there. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, you testified earlier about what is called a signal word. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that the signal word?
Yes, caution.
And just to remind us, what are the different possible signal words?
Danger, which is the most toxic, warning, and then caution.
So caution is the least toxic of the signal words.
That's correct.
Does this entire label have to be approved by the EPA?
Yes.
As well as the regulatory bodies in all the states?
Yeah, all the states that we want to have it registered in, yes.
Now, you've worked at Monsanto since 2009?
Yes.
Since you've worked with Monsanto, have the glyphosate-based herbicides that Monsanto sells in the lawn and garden space continually been approved for use by the EPA?
Yes.
And has the label that's been used on all of those products, have those labels been approved by the EPA?
Yes.
And have those labels also been approved by the appropriate state regulatory bodies?
Yes.